Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geert Lovink. I'm from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And thanks, Alex, for the invitation. It's a one-week lecture tour through the United States, and the Pitzer College has really contributed to this in a very important and critical way. So I'm glad it all came together, and I'm finally here, my first time here at Pitzer College. So, okay. In 2004, I came back from Brisbane, Australia, to found the Institute of Network Cultures inside a rather large applied science polytech in Amsterdam. What we do is we kind of create networks around emerging topics, where we put together networks of multidisciplinary groups and interests. So it's artistic, it's focused on design, on programming, and of course on research. And so there's an applied element to it. There's a reflective and critical edge to it, but yeah, in general, what we try to do is bring together the critical energies with the utopian energies. So for us, this is not a contradiction. Okay, we're in Europe. Critique and utopian impulses for us are not exclusive. Okay, so I'm going through a few examples and then I'll come to the topic. So here, for instance, this is the Society of the Query Network, which is focusing on the politics and aesthetics of search. Search is becoming more and more important. However, it also withdraws in the background, and we hardly notice anymore that we are searching. And in fact, less and less scholars and less emphasis goes to this very important field. And this, of course, reflects the rise of what Frank Pasquale is calling the black box society, in which there are more and more technologies that surround us, which we really depend on, but we know less and less about it. In fact, there's less and less academic research into them. So we are faced with this very strange paradox that the more these technologies surround us, the less and less emphasis. And this, of course, has got to do with the fact that the internet slowly but steadily moves in the background and becomes kind of a utility. No longer, of course, a public utility, right? If only. That chance, of course, was missed. That was a missed opportunity in the 90s. Okay, it's no longer so it's kind of a semi-public utility owned by, very large conglomerates and under this umbrella of what we call these days platform capitalism, right? So platform capitalism is kind of a new umbrella term under which people try to study what's going on there. A very important non-profit platform is, of course, Wikipedia, and we were very happy to conduct this research together with groups and centers in India and in Germany. So it's for the first time that I got money from India to do research, which is kind of a special situation. Of course, the Wikimedia Foundation, based in San Francisco, wasn't very happy with this, because you're not supposed to do critical research into Wikipedia, right? You're supposed to support them and join them in their efforts. But this is really our angle. We believe in independent and critical research, right? And that it also counts for the non-profit world, and also counts for the let's say so very good causes of free software and open source, right? This critical approach cannot be limited only, let's say, to the corporate giants or state policies, censorship, and so on and so on. We also have to look at our own affairs. So that critical approach cannot be focusing only on the big players. Okay, Video Vortex was already mentioned. It's our biggest network. In fact, we're again gathering and planning a next one, which I'm very excited about because I was fearing that the network was almost dead. Particularly because of the rise of Netflix and Hulu and a couple of other very big players. YouTube, still important, but in comparison, is a rather small player these days, believe it or not. So yes, in the world of online video, there's a lot happening, big shifts. And the net neutrality debate is, of course, a very important one, and primarily focused, in fact, on the end game, the power game inside that field of online video, right? Okay, so maybe we'll gather next year in Bangalore. Okay, another one that I want to mention here is the social media network. About 800 people worldwide. Looking in primarily, at least in the first phases, looking at alternative social media. So, okay, you can critique Facebook and Twitter, and we do so, but, you know, how would our alternative networks look like? What do we have to offer? What would be our, let's say, standards and protocols and network architectures? Okay, you can laugh about Facebook and its emphasis on friends. You can say, okay, I don't want my social network only to be limited by friends. That's a very limiting, narrow worldview, that I'm only communicating with friends. No, I'm also communicating with enemies, with anyone, with colleagues, but not necessarily with friends, right? That's just an example of what an alternative network architecture could look like. How would you define, you know, your social life, for instance? Now, that's easier said than done, right? So for about 5 years, this has now been running for 5 years. It has not gone away. For the simple fact that, you know, there's too much going on in that field. That field is not going away from the headlines. It's dominating our everyday life, right? Everyone, I suppose, here is on Facebook and a variety of social media, right? So I don't have to say more. So the National Theatre, for instance, in Amsterdam, they invited us. They said, yeah, we're going to do a Facebook farewell party. And they said, yes, that's very cool. In fact, it turned out that it wasn't really cool. What it really is that it's highly controversial, because people don't want to leave Facebook. And they have very heated debates. And they know that it's kind of boring, and the young people already have left Facebook, of course, because they can sense that it's no longer really happening there, and that this whole environment is surveilled by whoever, not just the NSA, but also your parents and the school and God knows what else is going on there. So anyway, so that was very interesting, because for us it's good to take all this stuff also outside of our let's say small circle, relatively small circle, of course, because yeah, Facebook in the end, it's 1.5 billion people. Social media is very big these days. I mean, I don't have to explain that, I suppose. We are also focusing on the let's say living conditions of artists, and we've done this so ever since we started our center. In Europe, you have this meme called the creative industries. It's coming out of the UK and Australia, but has now firmly landed in continental Europe as well. And it almost destroyed my center. So I was forced to work with industry, whatever that is. I never really understood that word anyway. So creative industries is now the dominant cultural policy in the Netherlands, right? So everything is measured according to these indicators and policy outlines. Okay. A bit more long-term, I think, is the Money Lab project. This is our latest one, and there's the reader. I think there, at least I brought a few copies. There's still maybe a few of them left there. Money Lab is a project that deals with the question of internet revenue models. How can artists and creative workers, people that we educate in our programs and so on, how can they make a living, a sustainable living? And this is a really, really important issue because more and more of us are, freelance, independent. We will no longer work for big companies because imagine, even very large players like Google, Facebook, they have, in fact, when you look at the amount of employers they have is very, very little. I remember that shocking amount of people that worked at Instagram when it was sold to Facebook. Do you remember? Yeah? Total amount of people working at Instagram at that very moment? 13, right? 13 employees, right? So this is just not going to work, right? If we look at it from a bigger, larger perspective of labor policy, that is just not going to bring any employment, right? So we got to come up with other ideas how people are going to make a sustainable living, right? And there are many, many models for that. Especially after the 2008 financial crisis, this was a huge wake-up call, globally speaking. Like we have to, we cannot just criticize global finance. It's not enough to focus on Goldman Sachs, right? It's okay, it's nice, but in the end it will not go anywhere unless we have really other models that will provide creative workers with an income. The critique of global finance isn't just not going to do that. So although it's very, might be justified, okay, so we started looking at Bitcoin, blockchain, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, crowdfinancing, what else? So mobile money. Mobile money is very big in other continents, and other ways of organizing. So this is still the biggest project that we're running. We've got another big international event on it, and the emphasis here again is on the arts, on artists. How do artists envision this? How can we instigate these dialogues between artists and the, let's say, entrepreneurial scene, the geeks, and so on, right? So that is the kind of overall aim. While doing this work in the last 12 years, we've been focusing, as Alex mentioned, more and more on publications. And while we were doing that in that period, of course, a lot of the digitization of the sector happened, right? The Napster moment, the disruption of the publishing industry is happening as we speak, right? And of course, the introduction of the tablets and the iPad was an important moment there, but there's much, much more happening. There's the Kindle, but not just Kindle. So there's a proliferation of platforms and technologies, and you are all aware of that, I suppose. And now we've got our own digital series. So this one, for instance, is a book we recently published. Also a study on global dating sites. Anyway, that's exciting because we can experiment with these new forms of distribution, and we offer, critical work at the same time. So it's kind of, and that's our applied science, let's say, approach. And we bring that together in books like this, where we kind of, also document. Well, a lot of the stuff in our field lacks documentation, and this is a problem. So we really we have to let's say, document and then disseminate that documentation as well. If you want others to have access to, let's say, other software or something like that, it comes with that. And so my center has more or less been split in two recently, since last year. And we now have this publishing lab, which is next door, which, for instance, is looking at publishing long forms. Long forms is an exciting new genre. Maybe you've heard of, or you have already used medium.com. Medium.com is the place where a lot of these long forms, at least here in the United States, are published. The long form is a new genre in that it's a standalone 5,000 to 7,000 word essay that, in our view, is read, let's say, by commuters who are on the train or somewhere, right? Half of the population in the world lives in urban areas these days. A lot of them commute, and a lot of them read while they commute. We're talking here really about substantial numbers of people in the billions, right? So this is really not a niche market that we're talking about. This is a really, really crucial shift in, let's say, global reading patterns, right? And of course we can demise the decline of academic publishing and the reading of the book, etc. But what we can also do is we can focus on the new reading cultures that emerge as we speak. And we're all aware of the young people. We know that they're reading on smartphones. We know that the tablets are very, very important. So it is our strategic aim to shape that environment, right? Academics and scholars and artists, they cannot be sitting on the side. Okay, so that was the first part of my introduction about our work that we do. And now I want to focus just a little bit on maybe my own interests, because a part of that I'm also just an ordinary media theorist and an internet critic. So I'm trying to do my own work as well, right? So yeah, so this is kind of what I often use as a let's say a distinction between the different stages that we've had in internet cultures. The period before 92 and then the 90s, the roaring 90s, the whole idea of cyberculture and so on and so on. Then, of course, the period after the dot-com crash, which is also called Web 2.0. And that phase, of course, gave the rise to things like YouTube, but also Facebook, blogs, and so on, right? Now, it's a bit controversial or debatable whether the fourth phase that is presented here is really a distinctive phase. You could also say it's kind of a result of the third one. And this is the phase we're in right now. And yeah, this is a phase also, of course, more and more defined by security and surveillance and a narrowing maybe also of the amount of platforms and applications that we use. I want to focus here specifically in this lecture on the dialectics between the selfie and anonymous as two distinctive forms of online identity. And in my understanding, the selfie and anonymous are closer than they might appear at first instance, because it's kind of appealing to say the selfie, oh, that's really me. And then when I put on the mask, yeah, I'm hiding my real self, and now I'm not me, right? This would be the kind of common reading of this, but I want to make some because this is of course the outrageous aspect of the selfie and the selfie culture, right? And yeah, that's an element that I love to study. So despite my European background, I am not against the selfie, what many people often think, that my critique of the narcissistic nature of the selfie implies that I'm an enemy of the selfie, but that's not the case, I can reassure you. I'm really fascinated by the selfie craze and hype. However, I want to study it from the perspective of the really existing internet culture. So, and the really existing internet culture for me, post-2013, is the one after Snowden, right? So, for me, I cannot look at the selfie just as an isolated phenomenon. There is no way. There's no way in the internet, which is so networked, you know, that kind of an approach of the self-portrait can just be done, let's say, in a comparison. Okay, well, there is the 16th century self-portrait, and now we have the 21st century self-portrait, right? I mean, that might be interesting from an art historian perspective, but definitely from a perspective of the internet culture, this is maybe not sufficient. And that's why, for instance, we do stuff like this. This is a translation into English by one of the, in my view, more interesting internet scholars from Berlin. So his name is Michael Zeeman. And his book, his thoughts, are dominated by this idea of control verlust, loss of control. And that's also the name of his blog and his book. And so this is, the subtitle is called 10 Rules for the Internet After Snowden. And this, for me, also provides a really, really good framework to understand, you know, what the culture of online identity looks like for today. And we can also do that, of course, from the perspective of Tor. Or what we also do is that we organize the so-called Crypto Design Challenge, in which we look at, let's say, the graphic user interface of attempts to protect people's privacy, right? And so the protection of people's privacy and the selfie, for us, we should try to somehow bring together or study them together instead of seeing them as a kind of dichotomy and easy contradiction, let's say. And there is, for instance, this Selfie Researchers Network, yeah, I'm very interested in the approaches that come from a network like this. My own approach there is really that I am embracing the let's say the study of narcissism and the selfie as narcissism. For me, this is not a dirty word. It doesn't mean that I say, well, you know, all the people who take selfies are sick and should go in therapy or something like that, right? This is because they suffer from narcissism or something like that, right? This is, I think, is the wrong approach. However, we should not we should not stop thinking. And you know, these books, both from 1979, by the way, so they're from the same period. They Foucault's work on the self, going back to his lectures that he gave here in the United States in 79 and 80. On the one hand, Christopher Lasch's book on the culture of narcissism. On the other hand, in my view, you know, give a very, very good kind of framework or something to look at. Okay, what has happened in these last 30, 40 years, and where are we now when we when we look at stuff like this? Where an article like this, it says, maybe you can't read it, but it says narcissism goes digital, right? I'm also very interested in young scholars like this, Andrew Culpet from Portland, Oregon, who is studying a kind of a new, or is redefining a new Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher, where he says, yes, there is a post-2013, post-Snowden reading of Deleuze. And I think that's very, very interesting, because so far we've only emphasized, let's say, the joyous reading. And we have, for a long time, especially because of the New Age positivism that ruled the Deleuzean environment for so long, we've excluded any possibility that a paranoid reading, which Deleuze himself really provides us with, can come to the surface. So this is an interesting approach. I'm also very interested in, for instance, the Israeli scholar Eva Illus, who has published this book called Intimacies. I'm working closely together with her. She's also interested in dating sites and so on and so on. But she's doing this really from a psychoanalytic and, let's say, Frankfurt School perspective. And I really, really like that. The subtitle of this book is, for instance, The Making of Emotional Capitalism. And there's a lot of clues for me in her work. Of course, much darker and much more destructive, if you like, is the kind of British critique of a guy like Andrew Keane, right? Much more polemic, much more journalistic, if you like. But nonetheless, interesting. This book, his book is that book is on the selfie culture, and emphasizing the relentless kind of pressure on people to perform in this culture of self presentation, right? So that is a bit more on the classic sociological side. I'm also interested in the let's say underlying structures that are happening there, right? And to understand the selfie, for instance, as part of what Douglas Rushkoff has described as the like economy, or the like generation. We need to understand that the selfies are posted to be liked. We all know that, right? And the selfies are an integral part of the social media environment. And so, as digital objects, they are attached to a lot of stuff, right? But primarily likes, and of course, increasingly even also identification. Mark knows the selfies are used already for identification, self-identification in part, but also, of course, they are massively harvested and collected to study them, and to feed the global databases in terms of identity and identity management. And this will be the ultimate, let's say, aim also of Facebook, and not to be a social network, but to become a global ID provider. This is known. This is not a secret. And so once the craze around likes and friends will be gone, Facebook will still exist, and will be there in the background, not in the foreground, but in the background as an ID provider. And as an ID provider, the facial analysis is playing a very, very important life. Okay, so we've also published a few things in that direction. For instance, this text on which provides us with a little bit of a history of the selfie. As I said before, We think that artwork and artistic expressions in these areas are very, very important. For me, a very interesting one is Amalia Umang. She's now based in LA, but I think she's originally from Argentina. She lived in Barcelona for a long time, and according to herself, she is living the selfie. So she's kind of living the selfie lifestyle. Obviously, she is producing an incredible amount of self-staged and selfies in all different poses, and these days she's now very successfully with her work exhibited in a lot of different galleries and museums. There's also another side of it, and that's of course Ai Weiwei. He is emphasizing a very different aspect of the selfie. For him, as a very famous Chinese artist who has been arrested several times, put on the house arrest, the selfie for him is not just an artistic form of expression, but for him it's also like what we find in the everyday life of people as well, this element. It's a sign that we're still alive. Look, this is me. I'm still there. I'm not yet arrested. I'm not in jail, right? I still exist, right? So for him, this is also, and he exhibits, by the way, the selfies as well. So in a lot of his recent exhibitions, he integrated these selfies as an integral part of his art practice. Then there is, for instance, also Lev Manowitz. Maybe you've heard about this installation. It's called Selfie City, and it compares a few cities. So it's a big database of selfies: Bangkok, Berlin, Moscow, New York, Sao Paulo, right? And you can see the difference. You can study the difference of the expressions of people in different cities, right? And it's kind of it's relatively simple. It's not very sophisticated, but nonetheless funny to see, because we know that people in Berlin and especially Moscow, of course, they are sad and depressed, of course, and that people in Sao Paulo, they're always happy on the beach and right? I mean, yeah, it's that kind of cliche, but it's not. Yeah, so you can see that in this installation. But recently there's also this one, and it was in fact only posted last week. And this is an installation. This is an artwork by a young St. Petersburg photographer who's been making secret photos in the subway of people. So on the left you see a woman sitting in the train, and he has made a picture of her. She didn't notice, maybe she was asleep, or it doesn't really matter. And then he went home, and here it's explained here a little bit, and then he kind of matched that face of the anonymous woman through a software called Find Face with the largest social network in Russia called VKontakte. Maybe you've heard that. It's the Russian Facebook, right? And so that has led, so that kind of facial recognition software, here you can see another example. So he takes the picture of the guy on the left, and then on the right you can see his profile picture on his VKontakte profile page, right? So that is, it's pretty powerful. It's known, of course, for if you are in this field, it's very well known. But to see that ordinary people, can kind of do this, this re-engineering, if you like, of databases. And so it means, that it means quite a lot. It means I can take a picture of you on the street, you wouldn't notice, and I can find out who you are, right? Yeah, that's, and that this is another aspect, let's say, of the selfie culture, right? That we're probably not so aware of, because obviously this is a selfie, this is also a selfie, as you can see, right? So this is selfie culture, right? Very much so. And so, okay, so now I want to come to the last part of the lecture, and I want to speak a little bit about, what people do against all this. And of course, if there's a selfie, there's also an anti-selfie, and we can kind of make pictures and take your anti-selfie. This is, I would say, a relatively simple, straightforward approach. I like this stuff more. It's called soul sucking, and it's kind of has this additional element to it, which of course was described by Sherry Turkle in her book Alone Together. So this was developed, this software by two artists, in fact, almost simultaneously. And I like it because it's, it expresses something of our time. This is really very telling, if you like. There's a lot of truth in these pictures, I think. And in a way, they're not manipulated. I think it's not. I wouldn't call them manipulated. There's sort of an additional layer of truth in them, which explains this idea, this concentration, this complete focus of people busy with their devices. There's also another element which I like, and that's this makeup artist from LA called Candy Johnson. I like her work because it's a very subtle line between, let's say, makeup and mask. And this is interesting for me because there you can also see that the selfie and, let's say, the selfie culture and the anonymous part, which is kind of the masking part, they're not exclusive. They can come together. And they come together, for instance, in her work. But there are more people who focus on this aspect. So she has an enormous collection of her masks. But yeah, she's coming from cosmetics, right? She's not coming from political activism. But I think it's very interesting because they're touching each other in the same way as pictures like this is doing, right? This is kind of camouflage, artistic or kind of fashionable stuff. That's of course also the very traditional mask, right? I mean, there is the Guy Fawkes mask of Anonymous. But as we know now that this is only one mask amongst many, and it's only quite a specific, let's say, expression of collective identity happening in this very specific group. There's also software now, especially after Snowden. We've seen the rise of anonymous software and apps for phones, like this one, Secret, but also Yik Yak. And the problem of them is, of course, that especially because they're driven by venture capital, that their business models are not always very clear. So the idea that they are anonymous is not always very, very sound. And so, yeah, especially the anonymous apps from Silicon Valley, they have a lot of kind of backdoors, corporate backdoors, where this not so anonymous information is then resold in the market for advertising. So there is a problem there, and I haven't really seen yet a lot of apps which have dealt with this. Yeah, for instance, the latest one is, of course, the Snapchat lenses. I don't know, is everyone aware of them? Yeah, you got them, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so this is kind of the latest kind of manifestation of this. Right? Nobotic Research, a group from Zurich, has already done a lot of interesting work in that, and it's a very, very good resource. It's good to see that the theorization, let's say, around this mask design has been going on for a while. And of course, it's a classic theme in anthropology, right? Masks are, of course, studied and have been studied for 150 years by anthropologists. So that you can find a lot of very, very valuable information about it, and Nietzsche writes about it. There's a lot of philosophers and writers who write about the mask. So it's a very, very good and rich, let's say, entry to that world. Okay. And I want to leave it here. This is a French painter that I recently discovered, and I thought, hey, these are odd images. What's going on here? When I looked at them, and then much later only I realized, of course, that these paintings are just in the visual arts context the latest manifestations of this global tendency towards mask design. Okay, I want to leave it here. Thank you very much for your attention.